Hi, good day everyone. I'm Rialen Irendora of BSED SS22 and I'm going to continue the discussion of Mr. Cantana regarding the global warming. So I have here the Malta's contribution to control global warming. So Malta introduced a resolution to the United Nations General Assembly of 1988 calling for the international action on climate change. So climate change, even before climate change, is one of the great problems of the world wherein they really have to take an action for it. And even now, such resolution was introduced to combat the ozone depletion, and this ozone depletion is due to the anthropogenic use of ozone depleting chemicals that had the remarkable effects of the sporing states. According to David Ottard, a professor of international law at the University of Malta and the legal advisor of the Prime Minister in Malta, according to him, a comprehensive global strategy to protect the weather and the climate as part of an effort to ensure that our planet remains fit to the sustain of human life. So there's a need, or there's a must be a strategy wherein we can protect our environment from the adverse effects of the climate change. So according to him, there must be an urgent need to conserve climate in the interests of the present and future generations of mankind. And so Malta introduced it two international legal instruments. So they introduced these documents or these instruments in the United Nations. So these two are the UNFCCC, or the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and the second one is the Kyoto Protocol. So the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change was adopted on May 9, 1992 in New York and entered into force on February 16, 2005. So the 192 states members, these states, of course, members of United Nations, have ratified the UNFCCC to date, and Malta signed the UNFCCC on June 12, 1992, and was ratified it in March 17, 1994. So such conventions, such conventions was really being tackled in the conference. So the Conference of the Parties, or the COP, is the prime authority of the convention. It is an association of all member countries or parties. So the countries was also referred to parties, and they usually met annually for a period of 2 weeks. These sessions are attended by several thousands of government delegates, observer organizations, and journalists. The Conference of the Parties, or the Conference of Different Countries, evaluates the status of the climate change and the effectiveness of the convention in achieving the objectives. It examines the activities of the member parties, particularly by reviewing national communication documents and emission inventories. It considers new scientific findings, and it tries to capitalize on the experience as efforts to address the climate change. To address the climate change. So the convention divides the countries, or also referred to the parties, divide the countries into three main groups according to its different levels of commitment and responsibility. Of course, in line with the overriding convention principle of of common but differentiated responsibility. So that's the principle of the convention, or the the UNFCCC. That's a common but differentiated responsibility. So they have divided the parties into three, or the different countries into three groups. the Annex 1, Annex 2, and the non-Annex. So the first Annex 1 parties include the industrialized countries that were members of the Organizations for Economic Cooperation and Development in 1992. Countries classified as having economics in transition, including the Russian Federation, the Baltic states, and the several Central and Eastern European states. So in the Annex 1 parties, these countries, including the industrialized countries in the world, the industrialized countries members of United Nations. And the second one parties, the Annex 2 parties, consist of the OSCD or the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, members of Annex 1, but not the EIT parties. They are required to provide financial resources to enable developing countries to undertake emissions reductive activities under the under the convention and to help them to adopt the adverse effects of climate change. And and in addition, they have to take all the practicable steps. Yeah, practicable steps to promote the development and transfer the environmentally friendly technologies to the different parties and the developing countries. So funding provided by the Annex 2 parties is channeled mostly through the convention's financial mechanism. The last the last parties, the non-Annex 1 parties, are the most developed, mostly the countries in the mostly developing countries. Certain groups of developing countries are recognized by the convention as being especially vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change, including the countries with low-lying coastal areas and those prone to desertification and drought. So, these non-annexed parties, mostly that the countries here are mostly from Africa, wherein in Africa, some of the countries there experiencing drought and desertification, wherein they are most vulnerable to climate change, even Philippines. So, other countries that rely heavily on income from fossil fuels productions and commerce, feel more vulnerable to the potential economic impacts of climate change response to the measures. So the convention emphasizes the activities that promise to answer the special needs and concerns of these vulnerable countries, such investment, insurance, and technology transfer. So aside from the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the second one legal instrument that was introduced by the Malta rather, is the Kyoto Protocol. So the Kyoto Protocol was adopted on December 11, 1997. In December 11, 1997 in Kyoto, Japan, and entered into force on February 16, 2005, and there were 191 parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change that have ratified the protocol to date. So the Malta signed the Kyoto Protocol on April 17, 1998, and was ratified it on November 11, 2001. So or the major target of the Kyoto Protocol is to reduce the greenhouse gas emission, or also referred as the GHG. So, if you will ask what is the distinction between the two two legal instruments that was introduced by Malta, the UNFCCC and the Kyoto Protocol. So the difference between the two is that the the U I mean the UNFCCC is encouraged to industrialize countries to stabilize or to stabilize the GHG emissions, while the Kyoto Protocol commits them to do so. So The the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change was tasked to stabilize in the industrialized countries, and the Kyoto Protocol wherein they have to take actions in the climate change or to the adverse effects of the climate change. As a result of more than 150 years of industrial activity, so the Kyoto Protocol places the burden for emission reductions on developed countries. So they developed or they introduced three mechanisms in Kyoto Protocol. The first one is the emission trading or the carbon market. The second one is the clean development mechanism. And the third and the last one is the joint implementation. So these mechanisms they introduce, of course, for the aim to reduce the adverse effect or the great impacts of climate change to us, and of course to stimulate to stimulate green environment, and so we can have, I mean, we can attain sustainable development. That's that was the Kyoto Protocol under the one of the legal instrument that Malta was introduced. So the UNFCCC or the United Framework Conventions on Climate Change. The next one is the Kyoto Protocol. Next is the Millennium Development Goals. So, through the critical analysis of the target setting, equity, environment, and the power dimensions, the International Institute for Environment and Development provides a particular focus on the poverty reduction in the water and sanitation, the slum upgrading, and tenure security, and ensuring environment will lies at all the sustainable development strategies, because they aim to show the best or they aim to reach the best, in which this includes the basic fundamentals of life. And these basic fundamentals of life including the access to land, shelter, food, the access to health, and their power and their rights. So this aim or these things that are trying to reach are present in the Millennium Development Goals. So these Millennium Development Goals address, of course, to all of us or to the people globally. So this implies the strengthening of the capacity of the changes occurs in the or the changes in the key indicators designed or monitored in each goal of the Millennium Development Goals. So what are these United Nations Millennium Development Goals? So actually these Millennium Development Goals are an ambitious agenda. Yes, an ambitious agenda because they're trying to reduce the poverty and improving the lives of the people globally, in which the leaders or the world leaders agreed in the Millennium Summit last September 2000. So each goal had one or more targets that have been set, in which they will reach this by 2015 and use the 1990 as their benchmark. So, yes, in September 2000, 189 countries recognized the importance of all countries developing partnerships that aimed to reduce extreme poverty by 2015 through the achievement of the set targets. So, these 189 countries, of course, members of the United Nations. So, they are eight Millennium Development Goals which aim to reduce the poverty, hunger and disease, address the lack of the adequate shelter and the access to health care while promoting the gender equality, health and education, and of course the environment sustainability. So, in order to ensure the progress continues to be made towards the achievement of the goals by 2015, it is important to track the targets of each goal. So, as what I have said earlier, they set one to two more targets in each goal of the Millennium Development Goals. So, this enables the international community, including the government and the non government organizations, to determine the areas that require greater focus and develop the appropriate, affordable, and equitable strategies. So they have or the they have eight goals in the MDG. So the first goal is to eradicate extreme poverty and hunger. So they have three indicators or the three targets. And the first one is to reduce by half the proportion of people living on less than $1 a day. The second one is to achieve full and productive employment and decent work for all, including women and men. So, the third indicator or the third target is to reduce by half the proportion of people who suffer from hunger. So, this is the thing or the first goal to be reached in 2015, which we all know that the poverty is the first top problem globally. So, the second goal is to achieve universal primary education. The indicator is to ensure, or the target is to ensure that all boys and girls complete a full course of primary schooling. So, how do we achieve this goal or this second goal? For instance, with the help of the donor funds and the debt relief in 2002, Tanzania, the country of Tanzania, was able to make a primary education free for all Tanzanian children. Almost overnight, an estimated of 1.6 million children enrolled in school, and by 2003, there were 3 million additional children were attending primary education. So that's a good thing because they somehow progress or they made something improvement in achieving the second goal. So the third goal is to promote gender equality and empower women. So we have here, as you can see, the purpose is to promote gender equality and empower women, is to raise the socio-economic status of women in developing countries through ensuring that females have equal access to education, because we all know before women received a a unequal or unfair treatment from the society, wherein they receive deprivations there between women and men. So the reasons for goal 3, as outlined, females are generally less likely than males to have access to education, which is before. Education has the ability to empower women, which enables to access to higher paid employment and work in jobs that are less likely to impact negatively on their health. So the set target for the goal 3 is to eliminate gender disparity in primary and secondary education, preferably by 2005 in all levels of education by no later than 2015. So that's the target for goal 3 in the MDG. So here, for girls in some regions, education remains elusive, which wherein poverty is the major barriers to education, especially among older girls. So yeah, poverty is the really the main problem or the major barrier. So in every developing regions except the CIS, men men outnumbered women in paid employment. So the women are largely relegated to more vulnerable forms of employment. Women are overrepresented in informal employment with its lack of benefits and security. Top level of jobs still go to men to an overwhelming degree. Women are slowly rising to political power, but mainly when boosted by quotas and other special measures. The fourth goal is to reduce child mortality. So the K target is to reduce by two-thirds the mortality rate among children under 5. The fifth goal is to improve maternal health. There are two K targets, wherein the first one is to reduce by 3/4 the maternal mortality ratio, and the second one is to achieve by 2015 universal access to reproductive health. And the sixth goal is to combat HIV or AIDS, malaria, and other diseases. So they had three key indicators in the sixth goal, wherein the first one is to halt and begin to reverse the spread of the HIV and the AIDS. And the second one is to achieve by 2010 the universal access to treatment for HIV for all those who need it. And the third one is to halt and begin to reverse the incidence of malaria and other major diseases. The seventh goal is to ensure environmental sustainability. So, the first indicator or the first key target of this goal is to integrate the principle of the sustainable development into country policies and programs, reverse of loss of the environmental resources. The second one is to reduce by half of the proportion of people without sustainable access to safe drinking water and basic sanitation. So the third one is to achieve significant improvement in lives at least 100 million slum dwellers by 2010. The last and the eighth goal in the Millennium Development Goals is to global partnership for development. The first key target or the first indicator is to develop further an open role-based, predictable and non-discriminatory trading and financial system, address the special needs of the least developed countries, and the last one is to address the special needs of the landlocked developing countries and small island developing states. So, through the programs of the actions for sustainable development of the small islands, some of the small islands in the developing states or developing countries, and the outcome of the 22nd special sessions of the General Assembly. So, I have here an excerpt from United Nations Secretary General, wherein it states here that eradicating extreme poverty continues to be one of the main challenges of our time, and it's a major concern of the international community. And ending this scourge will require the combined efforts of all governments, civil society organizations, and the private sector. In the context of the stronger and more effective global partnership for development, the Millennium Development Goals set time-bound targets by which progress in reducing income poverty, hunger, disease, lack of adequate shelter and exclusion, while promoting gender equality, health education, and environmental sustainability that can be measured. They also embody basic human rights, the rights of each person on the planet to health, education, shelter, and security. So the goals are ambitious but feasible, and together with the comprehensive United Nations Development Agenda, set the course for the world's effort to alleviate extreme poverty by 2015. So that's actually the summary of the goal or the subject or the objective of the Millennium Development Goals set by the United Nations, and of course in behalf of the 189 countries members of United Nations. Next is the Sustainable Development Goals. So the Millennium Development Goals was set to reach by 2015, and this MDG was replaced by Sustainable Development Goals because the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development galvanized or creates a process to develop a new set of sustainable development goals in which will carry a momentum generated by the MDG or the Millennium Development Goals and trying to fit into a global development framework beyond 2015. So unlike the Millennium Development Goals that was set to reach by 2015, this SDG or the Sustainable Development Goals was set to reach by 2030. So the In July 2014, the United Nations General Assembly proposed a sustainable development goals 17 sustainable goals to be put forward for the General Assembly approval in the September 2015. Yeah. So this document set the ground for the new SDG and the Global Development Agenda spanning around 2015 to 2030. So the spanning time is for 15 years. So the Open Working Group proposed these 17 sustainable goals to be reached in 2030. So the first goal is the no poverty. So the goal was or the this goal is to end poverty in all its forms everywhere globally. So the second goal is to the second goal is zero hunger. So the goal is to end this hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture wherein we can get the food. The third goal is good health and well-being. This goal is to ensure the healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages, men, women, young people, elderly, and the like. So the fourth goal is the quality of education. This goal is to ensure inclusive, inclusive and equitable quality of education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all, wherein the opportunities for men and women will be equal and fair and will be just. So the second one or the next one is the gender equality. This is to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. The sixth goal is clean water and sanitation, which is to ensure the availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. So the next one is the affordable of clean energy. This is to ensure the access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. The eighth goal is to reduce work and economic growth, wherein this is to promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. And then the next one is the industry, innovations, and infrastructures. This is to build resilient infrastructure, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and foster, of course, innovation. Next is the reduce inequalities. Reduce inequalities, this is to reduce inequality within and among countries. The next one is to sustainable cities and communities. This is to make cities and human settlements inclusive or open for all, safe and resilient, and of course sustainable. The next one is to responsible consumptions and productions. This is to ensure sustainable consumptions and production patterns. And the 13th goal is to the climate action. This is to take urgent action to combat the climate change and its impacts. We all know climate change is one of the societal problems of the earth. Then the next one is life on land, peace, justice, and strong institutions. This is to protect, this is to conserve and sustainable use the oceans, seas, and the marine resources for sustainable development. The next goal is to protect restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, then sustainably manage forests, combat desertification, halt and reverse land degradation, and halt the biodiversity loss. The 16th goal is to promote peaceful, inclusive societies for sustainable development, and of course, to provide access to justice for all and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels or for everybody. The last and the 17th goal is to strengthen the means of implementation and revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development. So that's all for sustainable development. I hope you learned something, and if you have comments, objections, suggestions, feel free to comment below our video presentations in the comment section, wherein you are free to express your thoughts. So that's all. Thank you.